The Economist.
Jeffrey Sachs is the director of the Earth Institute at Columbia University in New York and one of the world's best-known economists. We met him at The Economist's Buttonwood conference and invited him to tea. So, Jeff Sachs, thanks for coming to tea with The Economist.
Pleasure.
There seems to be a deepening gloom about the US economy. How bad do you think things are?
We have problems in so many dimensions right now. A massive fiscal crisis, high unemployment, a very divided society, big income inequalities actually at historic highs. These are all solvable problems, but there is a widespread sense that none of them is being seriously solved right now.
And your guess is that things get worse after the midterm elections? Or?
We've come to the point where there really is no period of governance. There's only the period of campaigning. And the day after the midterm elections will be in the presidential race, in effect. And I fear that since we're in a reality where we have to govern, we have to adjust, we have to find new directions, but we don't allow ourselves as a society to do that, we're probably going to find more instability, more unpredictability, more screaming as a society that's come to know a lot of screaming at each other. And unfortunately, this is the wrong time for all of that.
If you had to list the top three things that really need to be addressed in order to change the mood in America, get people feeling more positive again and feeling that things are really moving forward in a sustainable way, what would those three things be?
First, I would take a 10-year horizon and say, let's use this decade to get out of a series of quite deep problems. Now, I would say we need tax increases as well as spending cuts. Spending cuts like ending these occupations in Iraq and Afghanistan. Tax increases, perhaps a VAT or a graduated consumption tax. But I would show how we're going to get the deficit down. Make that clear. Second, I would talk about how the U.S. should maintain great dynamism technologically by rebuilding the infrastructure, by investing in new energy systems, by taking seriously the environmental threats. And third, I would say that we need to address the deep inequalities, especially the poverty trap of a large part of our society, by making sure that young children get a good start and are able to get through school. We're now 12th in the high-income world in terms of the share of the population 25 to 34-year-old with an associate or higher tertiary degree. This is shocking. None of these things is short-term, shovel-ready stimulus. I don't believe those things exist. I would aim for the medium term, I would explain plans for the medium term, and I would try to help move the country towards the medium-term success.
So do you think there's no point in having another stimulus or QE2 or QE3, massive amounts of money being pumped in through monetary policy?
Well, I'm afraid of the QEs because we've had a decade of bubbles that have come in significant part from the Fed. And even if the bubble isn't in the U.S. economy this time around, it's going to spill over to some other part of the world economy. The way that they just pump up the money supply is almost sure to be relaxed in the short term by booms in some kinds of asset prices and further trouble down the line. So I think monetary policy is just not distinguished itself at all since the mid-1990s and maybe even further back. In terms of fiscal policy, how could we think about stimulus now when we have nearly 10% of GNP budget deficit? We have absolutely no medium-term scenario to get it under control. To think about deliberately increasing that deficit now in a context where we have no backstop down the road, I think would be the height of irresponsibility, and I don't think it would create any kind of response of the type that we want. It would create, and it's not going to happen, by the way, because politically it can't happen.
But isn't the consequence of that decision that we live with an unemployment rate of 9.6% or perhaps even higher than we have today?
I think the way to get the unemployment rate down is probably not in year one or year two or in a dramatic way, but
So
gradually.
you're really willing to live with the unemployment
I'm
rate
not
where
willing
we
to
are?
live with it. This is the result of a generation of really bad policy making and bad behavior and massive bubbles. So it's not that I'm glibly accepting a horrible situation. It's rather saying that our tools are really rather weak. Under the current circumstances, we better at least get the medium term right, because getting the short term right is extremely chancy and difficult, and if we point in the wrong direction for the medium term, we could lose much more than what we think we're gaining.
As you look to Britain, I know you're a fan of what David Cameron's government has done on aid, where they seem to have stuck to their promises, but do you like what they're doing with austerity cuts and reducing the size of the state?
I do think that they're taking the right decision on getting the budget under control. Whether I would do things slightly differently, probably yes, so I don't want to get into each cut, each tax policy and so forth, but a government that has come in and said we've got a massive fiscal hole. We have to be responsible. We have to use our 5-year mandate to get this under control. We have to start now, not by stimulus today and promising something in the future, but by moving in the right direction now, I think is absolutely good governance. I think over time, absolutely, the UK is going to have to find new sources of growth. When the Prime Minister spoke about infrastructure, technology, science, making sure that these longer-term means of the competitiveness of the UK and the quality of life are honored, I think is very important. But the basic idea, you come in, you have a 5-year mandate, you lay out what you're going to do, you talk about a 5-year scenario, you get started in the right direction, bravo. That's good governance.
I mean, do you think this is the British approach is something that maybe Obama should look at for the second half of his first term?
What he should have done was this when he started with his 4-year mandate, because the country was looking for that kind of longer-term vision. Instead, they went for the very short term. And that, I think, was a decisive error in my view. Now, I still think as president of our country, he should lay out the medium term, because he's the only person constitutionally empowered to do so. We need leadership, and I hope that he does that. It's just very, very difficult after what's going to be a very tough midterm, and with 2 years left for the election. I guess the only solace might be is that by laying forward a serious medium-term scenario, he can at least campaign on the vision of the future, and I think he needs to do that.
Now, you've obviously over the years campaigned for all sorts of changes on the policies that the rich world adopts towards the poorest parts of the world. What do you think are the top priorities at this moment in time, that as we look about how we assist people in poverty?
What's interesting is that we have developed some very powerful tools, both the specific technologies of how to help and even the mechanisms of how to help. The Global Fund to Fight AIDS, TB, and Malaria is a wonderful new instrument of fighting 3 pandemic diseases. A new global fund for agriculture and food security at the World Bank could do the same. We have these tools, we have powerful technologies, wonderful ways to control malaria, to do rapid diagnostic tests, and on, but we have basically lost the will to fund them properly. And so we're in a pretty deep crisis, of course, of global will. The UK stands out uniquely as a country in a squeeze, brutal budget squeeze, but it says we ring fence our development aid. I do believe that this is going to redound to the benefit of the UK for years to come in foreign policy. It's widely respected, it's widely recognized. We have tools, mechanisms, ways to save lives, help get people on the path to development, but we're not taking them right now. Then comes a second huge agenda, which is climate change, which is huge stakes for the world. And we've promised to do even more on that, but we haven't even fulfilled the beginning agenda. And this is a global system that is not able right now, it seems, to take a multi-year view and a deeper view of the real interests that we have to make this globally integrated society work effectively.
Now, have you ever been more pessimistic about the outlook for the world?
I think it's just odd for me as an American who grew up at a time of great American belief in itself, of confidence, of putting a man on the moon, of having helped build the United Nations and the Marshall Plan and the Peace Corps. I believe in all of that, and I believe that that is the kind of role that the world should see from those countries who can manage to do it. And yet what we find, and it's a shock to me at this stage of my life to see the U.S. so ineffectual, so unable to solve its own internal problems, and leaving such a massive gap in the global political scene. I'm optimistic on so many other fronts, I have to say, because it's no secret that we're at a time of absolutely remarkable success and ferment in technological advance. The digital age is a true, profound breakthrough for the world. What's happening in genomics and nanotechnology and so many other areas is profound. I believe that what's happening in China with development in India and Brazil and so forth is wonderful. So there's many parts of good news, but the question I'm asking is, can we manage, govern ourselves, and cooperate in order to see through what's possible right now? And it is profoundly worrisome on that score.
Well, on that challenging note, I'd like to thank you, Jeff Sachs, for coming to Tea with The Economist.
It's a pleasure to be with you. Thanks for the tea.